So here we are again for the final time in the Inter Service this season. Can you believe it? Have you had a chance to get your breath back, JJ Bates?
No, is the answer. And to be fair, I think it was probably the Army Navy day that knocked you out from last week, essentially.
I think so.
Yeah, so we didn't get a chance to preview the RAF Army game because poor Simon here was struck ill. But I genuinely think probably that men's game on the Army Navy day it was enough to blow anyone out. It was the greatest Army men's game, Army Navy game of all time.
I think it's fair.
Yeah. I mean,
assessment.
When you have that many tries, 1 point game, 1 point differential, and literally a try scored in the last second, any knock on, any moment, that's it. Navy game. And it just looked, in my opinion, it seemed like it was going to go Navy. You just felt Army were reeling in, and then it would just be another few points to the Navy, and then you're just like, no, they're going to keep control of this game. What was it? So at the half-time, it was 29-5
to the Navy at half-time in the men's match, which many would view as an unassailable lead.
Yeah.
And not unassailable, but the chances of coming back from that, some might say.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you watch one of those poker games and you see like the percentages on screen.
Cricket as well.
Yeah, exactly. You just would have seen, something like 2.1% chance for the Army, and then literally that last second, that Corrali try was just like pulling the ace. It literally was like flipping that card over, and oh my god, you just it's because it's been a couple of weeks now. We haven't it's just thinking back to it and everything that happened.
You pinch yourself now.
Yeah,
you can think it did happen, but it still doesn't quite feel real in some other aspects of what we witnessed at the end, as you say.
Yeah, and it was a try that was worth winning any match as well. That if you don't get the chance, please rewatch that game and just relive the drama. It's on the Forces News YouTube channel, and that drama, that last moment, and you see the celebrations. And if we broke down the match, I think it was a case of, it was squad strength for the Army, which won it for them. That bench, the players that came on, just the Navy were a little bit out on the feet at the end of the game. They put so much into that. What a game.
Remarkable. I mean, as you say, the depth was fantastic, and I think two players who made a massive difference in terms of getting ball going forward for the Army in the second half and ensuring that they were constantly in the front foot, it seemed, at one point anyway, in the second half. Frank Kelly at 12, or certainly in that inside centre channel, a big ball carrier. We were chatting to Cam McDonald, weren't we, a few weeks before the tournament began, and he said he's one of the players to look out for, and Bola as well, Fax Bolladau, back row, huge ball carrier as well, made a massive difference indeed too. But we talk about the depth, but the resilience to come out firing after a 29-5 deficit at halftime, 24 points, in arrears. That takes a lot of spirit.
24 points in arrears against a quality team,
defending champions, no less.
Yeah. It wasn't a case of they were up against a team where they knew that they were going to come back at. This was the team that they lost against last year, so it makes it doubly good. Like, it was an immense achievement, and it was, as you say, that belief. But I think that goes back to this whole Army rugby mentality. If you look at their dominance in the competition over all those years, I think that sometimes is a difference, because there has been plenty of close games between the Army and Navy, and Army have some sort of mental resilience, sort of reminiscent to the All Blacks at a peak. You could have,
you feel you're ahead,
ahead,
never feel too far ahead.
Until the final whistle's gone, it's not over. No. And that they proved that on like a couple of weeks ago now.
A couple of weeks ago now.
And then if we go on to the women's game, talking about Army mentality, it was ruthless.
It was. Just remind us of the score, of course, in the women's
So,
game.
yeah, the score ended at 78-5 to the Army women.
Massive
yeah.
win. It couldn't get more dominant than that.
Huge win, and it came through just... They didn't stop. It wasn't a case of they went and got a heavy lead and then they took their foot off. They kept on scoring until the very end, and no one typified that more than the captain, Jade Mullen. Her try with a little show and go, and then she still had like 2 players to get past, and like she made the break with a show and go, and then she just kind of like there was no stopping her, like even though there was arms dragging her back, like she was going to get over that line. I love talking to her because you get that kind of feeling of how she is in terms of their preparation. She talks about trying to get perfection out of the team, and that game they weren't far off it. But if we go back to it, if you watch that first 25 minutes, the Navy women will be pleased with those 25 minutes. Yeah. Those 25 minutes, they were competitive. They were looking at... They were starting to get on top in terms of possession, in terms of territory.
Fairly early try. I mean, you know.
And they were camped in the Army 22 for a good while. Then the Army were actually accruing quite a few penalties, kind of player sin-binned, and then it seemed like going down to 14 women just kicked them on. They stopped the Navy from scoring, went down the other end, scored, and then that was kind of the floodgates open from there.
What do you put that down to? Because, you know, that inability of the Navy to make more of those, the territory they had, and make more of the possession they were showing in periods, is that a lack of clinical finishing, or is that just a reflection of how strong that Army defence is?
It's a bit of both. From going back and looking through it, I think there is moments where you can see the difference between the actual kind of core skill set between the two teams. So when the Navy were in the 22, they were getting a little bit excited, so you could see the back line creeping up, so they weren't keeping their depth, so therefore the passing wasn't going in front of the players coming onto the ball, therefore you're not getting that momentum going into contact, so you're not making those yards over the game line when you go into contact because you're standing still and the defence is coming up on you. And then if you take a look at the Army women, they were keeping their composure in that 22, and that's the difference. Composure, that excitement when you're that excitement when you're in score zone, and the Army women they're so ruthless, and we've talked about them before, and we'll talk about them again. But they are so good in their skill set and in their core skill sets, and they keep that depth. And whenever you see them coming onto the possession, it's always on front football. And it is literally that pass is coming out in front of the player. They're running onto it. They're making yards.
They have depth as well. They have depth, not just in the squad, in terms of their positioning.
In terms of their position in the back line.
So, Army come along, first game in the tournament, both for the men and the women, with remarkable displays in very different ways, I guess, for both those matches. But that completely changes, of course, the complexion at that point of the tournament. We'd had a Royal Navy men's a narrow victory in Plymouth, and also an RAF fairly convincing win for the RAF women over the Navy in that match. But then the Army come in and stake their claim and say, no, here we are, and this is obviously going to be a very difficult challenge for anyone to overcome us. But that, of course, set up a beautifully enticing and tantalising decider in the final weekend at Kingsholm, because you had the RAF and the Army teams, men and women.
It was all to play for. All to play for.
How much anticipation was there, JJ, when you arrived at the stadium?
Do you know what? It was brilliant. Arriving there, it was, sunny day. You could, it just kind of it was perfect conditions, and at Kingsholm, it's just a nice place to be. You know, you're just in a rugby town, in a proper rugby stadium.
Absolutely.
And you can feel the build up with the players and then people coming in and just talking around amongst each other, covering the broadcast. I think we were all like getting that excitement and feeling that, that tingles of what could possibly be. I spoke to you before the game as part of the socials preview, and you made the bold prediction that the Army women were going to win.
It's always the challenge you set to me, JJ, before these games, putting me in the hot seat and asking me what my predictions are. But in truth, it's very difficult. Of course, how do we know what's going to happen? We expected very close matches on both fronts, and especially when you see the sun out and a synthetic surface as well, which tends to favour, in those conditions, a lot of open rugby.
Yeah, I mean, that's open rugby's been the story of the tournament, and to be fair, when you're thinking about open rugby, you probably do think of the RAF women. They're so good in that open play, and if we get into the game, we'll talk about Karis Williams-Morris. I mean, she is just brilliant in space. Interesting that they played her at fullback instead of wing.
It is interesting because we've seen her at wing so often. And in Plymouth, she was electric on that left wing, wasn't she, against the Royal Navy?
Yeah, and she was scintillating, and just in terms of that head down to the corner, and she scored those perfect winger tries. Every try that a winger wants to get.
Yes.
That she's brilliant. As soon as there's a bit of that space in the corner, she'll pin her ears back and head down, and there's no stopping her. But in terms of the game itself, I've the RAF women were incredible in the first half of that game. Amy Kane, her try, I think it was the RAF second try, where she broke off from the maul and then just did the classic front row try where you peel off and there's no stopping an England international from that sort of range.
There's no stopping, and you mentioned tries that wingers dream of, tries that front rows dream of as well. Seeing what Amy Kane and seeing her calibre, seeing someone of her quality, international stardom, and helping England to 3 successive Grand Slams just before the tournament, that just is so evident on the pitch when you're seeing, and also just her movements off the ball as well, and how much time she seems to have on the ball. I know that maybe sounds like a silly thing to non-rugby lovers or people who haven't watched much rugby, but it's brilliant actually to watch, and how much, I think, pressure she's able to take off her pack.
Yeah, and you certainly saw that in the first half. I mean, at half time, the Army women were actually
behind.
They were actually behind. So it was, and they scored just before half time, which is so vital.
That was critical.
I really do think it was critical.
Because so the Army got off that strong start. Sarah Batley, vice captain of the Army team, scored. We then had Amy Kane levelling the score, and a conversion making it 7-5 then to the RAF. Catherine Robinson, and then that brilliant Karis Williams-Morris scoring as well. And Daisy Faddy.
By the way, if you've not seen the Karis Williams-Morris try from the halfway line, it is on the Forces socials, or go rewatch the game on the Forces News YouTube game.
Absolutely.
That was incredible, where she picked it up from the halfway line, the bit of loose ball. She's passed in front of from just behind the halfway line, and then she's got about 2 players I think she has to beat, but she runs all the way around the outside. But rather than doing, touching down in just the corner, she runs round and goes under the post, just because her pace can do that. That most people, when they got to the try line, they're just getting it down, and that's, again, we're talking about international quality. That
would be nice.
A Wales international on those levels, and I thought she was fantastic, but that Army women's team is just so ruthless, and we'll go back to our original point. In terms of what they're like in that final 22, that I think the RAF women would feel that they deserve to have been in a far more commanding lead in that first half, but they weren't.
From one winger to another, Hannah Gilmore of the Army was able to bring it back to 1917 at halftime, and that is a huge difference, 1912, 1917, and just keeping them within touching distance. And it keeps, when you're on top, when you're playing games, you know yourself when you're on top and you're going in at halftime, but the deficit's been reduced to only a couple of points, you're thinking, all that hard work, it's not for nothing, of course, but it really reduces the, not just momentum, but your feel-good factor going to the changing rooms.
It's a psychology thing. You know it when you play rugby, and when you feel like you've had to work so much harder for your tries than your opposition. It may not actually be that way because you're both defensively trying as hard as each other.
Exactly.
But you feel it. You feel it because you haven't converted your opportunities in that final 22. And I spoke with Karis after the game, and she agreed that was a difference between the two sides. The fact that the Army were able to convert all their seemed like every chance within the 22 they were able to convert. Like they were able to score off, and the RAF had plenty of opportunities and just couldn't do so. And that comes again through ruthless defence from the Army, but it also
killer instinct in attack.
Absolutely. But it also comes through a few mistakes with the RAF that they'll feel that they can bring in. They've got a lot to take out of this tournament, the RAF. As in the way they played, and I think they'll feel like with that first half performance, it'll be very interesting 2025 for the RAF women, especially with the coaching change. But again, speaking to Karis, that they are not changing their philosophy. No. They are going to play the RAF way, which, if you don't know, is similar, like a Harlequins way. Yes. They will play the ball. They will play total rugby. So it'll be really interesting to see them next year.
Yeah, they've got a lot to take away, as you say, and they'll be extremely disappointed about that second half, scoring no tries, and pointless as well in that second half. To lose 36-19 in the end, having been 19-17
up. It's crazy, I'm really surprising as well, and goes again to how that Army women's team is ran, and they just are... we spoke at the beginning that they could play in the women's premiership and
we did say
easily compete.
Yeah, and it was on show in both their games. And Charlie Maxwell, who was on commentary with me for the women's match at Gloucester and indeed at Twickenham as well, was referring to the camaraderie in the camp on Saturday and how together the players are. And we heard after the game at Twickenham, we heard about Sarah Mitchelson's father having very sadly passed away, the Army coach, and how much that has galvanised the players even more, and they've come around her and they've played for her as well, as they do anyway, but brought them even closer together. And I think that was very clear, especially on Saturday at Kingsholm. And also, as you alluded to slightly earlier as well, Jade Mullen speaking at the end of the game at Twickenham saying, we're obviously very pleased with the 78-5 win. Who isn't? But at the end of the day, there are things I want to see tightened up. And she was a bit, I think, frustrated with some of the mistakes they made at Twickenham. But boy, they put on a show in that second half. Yeah, they did. And once again, they went down to 14 players again and went straight down the other end and scored. Yeah. There was an opportunity that for the RAF women perhaps take the points for the posts, then get the possession back, and maybe slightly slow the game down and play it a little bit more. Play it a little bit more tactically that way. Whether it's a bit of territory as well.
But as we said, that's not the RAF way, and I don't think they're going to ever be that way. They're going to win, and they're going to do it in their way. But perhaps that probably was the sensible thing to do at the time. But what is it? 14 players again, straight down the other end, score a try. And I spoke to Jade Mullen about that after the game, and she said it is their mentality. There is something about them that they will always try and overcome.
It's a winner's mentality, really, is to find a way from anywhere on the pitch and any position in the game as well. And of course, they find themselves behind, not admittedly going in at half-time as behind as perhaps they might have otherwise been. However, coming from behind is brilliant. And a word for Sally Bellhouse, the player of the match, the fantastic number 8 in the Army, and a vet as well. I know we've documented her work as a vet, but just a great ball carrier, and enabling that pack, enabling the backs to be coming onto ball at speed and moving forward.
I think that was key, and especially when they needed her the most, and when they're up against it, just to rely on that ball carrying and create the space and opportunities for the players to exploit. Yeah, she was phenomenal on Saturday. She really, really was, and it just created that sense when one person kind of picks it up, grabs the game by a scruff of neck, then everyone else will go with you. And yeah, I thought she was phenomenal. But the Army women were phenomenal all tournament, and completely deserved winners.
On one hand, we talk about the sunshine and it being great for the spectacle and running rugby. We always talk about that, and good for handling as well. But when it comes to quite a warm day, which we had on Saturday, and I think it got up to sort of mid-20s, 24, 25 degrees at one point, how much, and these are finely tuned athletes we're talking about, but how much extra strain does that put on the body at such high intensity over 80 minutes? And how much also does that make it slightly more difficult if you've got sweaty palms and you're trying to handle a ball in those tight situations and at speed?
Yeah, exactly. It's those incrementals, and those, when you've been training and preparing in sleet, freezing
lakes,
temperatures, and it's a completely different game and mindset in terms of how you're playing. Because what you tend to do when you're playing in those sleet, cold conditions, in the rain, you bring your players together, you shorten your passes, but when you see the sunshine, you automatically spread a bit further. But with that being said, you still got the whole sweaty palm situation. You tire a lot more quickly. So things where you might think you'll be up to speed getting to the ball when you're playing the ball into the space rather than to the man, you just kind of, it's fingertips where it would have been in your hands. So you have to be wary of that. But like these are finely tuned athletes. We're talking about some of these players play in the Premiership. These players,
internationally as well.
Yeah, internationally. They are used to it, but it was, when you think we had games postponed before the game before the tournament because of weather conditions. Yeah, it would have been very, very different. I think,
different outcome.
Yeah.
And the rugby we would have watched would have inevitably been very different and potentially much slower ball, for each of those sides. But nevertheless, 3 weekends, 3 sunny days, fantastic rugby. And we had the women's game to kick off at the weekend at Kingsholm. Moving on to the men's. The men also full of hope, both sides. RAF, light blues, couldn't quite do it in the women's, but could they do it in the men's? Well, another game before which there was plenty of anticipation and crowd building ahead of on Saturday, ahead of everything as we thought.
I'm talking, when the crowd was building, people coming in and talking to everyone before the game, everyone was expecting a really close game, and some people were saying, I can't predict it, like it could go either way, and in some respects it was a very similar game to the women's game.
It was.
So
you're not wrong there. I think I'd agree. Yeah.
So the RAF had a really good first half. They were up to just the point of half time, and it looked like they were going to go into half time in the lead, and then essentially the Army had other ideas, and then just before half time it was Radiarana,
beautiful footwork, a sevens veteran as well, wonderful player, Radiarana in the centre.
Yeah, so he managed to get over just before half time, and that changed the game. It's amazing how those scores just before half time, when you go into the dressing room thinking you're up, and then all of a sudden you're behind, and the whole positivity and momentum's such a real thing in sport, and as we've seen in the Army Navy game, Army live off momentum.
Well, in that second half, not to throw completely back to Twickenham, but of course, as you say, in that second half at Twickenham, the Army coming out, and after the first couple of tries they scored in that second half, it just looked like a sort of a red wave. Heading down
it's just
the
that
pitch.
period in the second half where the Army just seemed to be getting over, and they were scoring tries that I think the RAF will be very annoyed with themselves. But essentially, there was a lot of dogleg defending, and it could have been, again, talking about the conditions, hot day. It's hard to keep that concentration up. Sometimes, and it's a hard tournament, but there was essentially what would happen is players will end up taking 2 or 3 players into the defence. The RAF will come round, they'll dogleg rather than keeping their positions. And what I noticed about the Army men, they're just so good at support running.
Amazing. Those offloads, always having someone, or most of the time having someone on both shoulders to be able to pop the ball to.
Yeah, and you saw it with the Twickenham hero Coravali going over again on Saturday. There's just a lot of Fijian flair on show, and the classic Fijian offloads. We're taking the ball into contact and getting that ball offloaded to another player, and it just got to a point where it was starting to look a bit dodgy for the RAF. But then McAnally got that try that
Josh McNally, yeah. I mean, you're right. There were points where they tried to come back, of course, with scores of their own. But it was just that, I think, that turning point. Would you agree that turning point of the penalty try that they got early on in the second half, I think it was, for the deliberate knock-on, and the Army would have been in had it not been for that from the RAF. And it was 19-14 at that point, automatically going to 26-14, and it just seemed to knock the wind out of the RAF, and a couple of bang quick tries after that just seemed to sort of kill the game. Yeah.
It really did, and that was the thing that we were saying. This Army team lives off momentum, and as soon as it got the tails up, there was just no stopping them, and it just seemed like they weren't letting the RAF up for breath, which is what they needed. But they essentially needed that kind of moment of kind of trying to kill the game, but the conditions weren't set for it. You just wanted some sort of downpour, slow these people down, slow these men down. They're just coming at you in waves and waves, and trying some stick it up your jumper rugby. But the day was not set for that, and I mean the tournament hasn't been set for that. We have seen a ridiculous amount of tries in this tournament. It's just been, I asked for jouet at the start of the tournament.
You did, and they listened to you, JJ. They all listened to you, and I think that was just about right. Probably because of your lovely bright kits that you've been wearing, and stash as well. Valerians must be delighted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just representing. You've got to represent your club. That's a given. But there has been some amazing rugby on show, and I think if we talk about the tournament in general, it has been a brilliant advertisement for military sport, military rugby, and rugby as a whole. I think it's been those players and what they've brought to the game. They literally shown what military rugby is all about, and it is about playing and trying to show off skills and skill sets, and there was no sense of just playing that boring attritional kind of a game. They are
pick and drive.
Yeah,
stuff.
There was none of that. Though I mean, there was plenty of power on show.
Yeah, and sometimes you need to pragmatically play that sort of a game. You mentioned weather conditions as well. Sometimes force you to play that brand of rugby, but when the opportunity arises and when conditions are in your favour, more dynamic rugby is what we want to see. Jouet.
It was literally, so if we can look back at the tournament, dynamic rugby is probably the key phrase from it, and I think going into next year, I think we'll see more and more of it, and I don't think it's going to show any signs of stopping. I think it's going to be interesting going into next year. I think the Navy women will look back and see they obviously have a lot to work on. They wanted to close the gap in terms of that Army-Navy game, and they didn't do so. No. However, there was a period a good period of that game where they played better than they did
They could
last
have had
year.
a couple more tries, maybe even 3 more tries, had they converted those opportunities when they got into the 22, the Army 22. But at the end of the day, as you say, on Saturday it was 36-19 to the Army women, 45-21 to the Army men. Deserved winners in the end. What about the rhythm of the tournament? Because there were some comments about the Twickenham showpiece, if you like, being in the middle of the second round and not the final round this year. Kingsholm having that label, so to speak, and Plymouth coming a couple of weeks before Twickenham, and then back-to-back games for the Army, for example. Some people asking at that point, how are the Army going to fare, or will it suit the Army, just to get out there immediately again? What did you make of that? Was that something you think is just was maybe a sticking point, or was that something that's just maybe made more out of than needs to be?
It's probably made more out than needs to be, because at the end of the day, these players are they're all finely tuned. They know how to prepare for a game. They know how to prepare to go back to back. They know how to prepare for an off week. They do so.
Second nature to them, isn't
it? They do so on many occasions. So I don't think it's a massive thing. However, I love these sort of professorial moments.
However, and I'm waiting for you to produce your whiteboard behind us to show us all these workings out.
However, I do think going the back-to-back games almost felt like an advantage in some respects, due to the fact if we look back at the RAF Navy, very close game, kind of tuned up the Navy for that Army game. They knew that they had to kind of step up a little bit more. They almost threw the game away at the end of that RAF game. So then they came into the Navy game probably a little bit more tuned up. They were coming into the Army game a little bit more tuned up, ready to go, already off the top level, and they caught the Army off guard. They really did, just at the level that they were playing at from the offset. And then obviously the Army had that going into the final game in terms of that momentum straight off the back of the amazing victory at Twickenham.
Yes.
So sometimes it can work in your favour in terms of momentum and in terms of those type of things. But then again, it also would have works in your favour when you get players back to fitness. That extra off week can help you work on a few things tactically. So you can look at it both ways. Interesting.
Interesting is a good way to
interesting, but probably make more out of it. And none of the coaches or the players will accept it as an excuse or give it as a reason. They're there to win no matter what. I think some of those players would play back to back day after each other rather than even a week off. You know?
This is it. I think that, it depends who you speak to, right?
Yeah.
Some people want that 3-week break, like the RAF had between Plymouth and Gloucester. Others want to go straight away, as you say, back to back. I think what's very exciting, though, because a lot's made of the Army's dominance, and especially in the women's game and the men having won so many titles. But are we witnessing a closer tournament, or a tournament that keeps getting closer and closer? I mean, in the men's game, as we've seen, any one of the three of those teams really could have had things gone slightly differently. I know in the end the Army were convincing winners in Gloucester, but those are three teams that all of whom can win. In the women's game, the Navy are trying to close the gap, but we see an RAF team, as you've said yourself, who appear to be really challenging the Army in a big way, and who'll be ruining some chances in that Kingsholm game. But I tell you what, they have a great chance next year.
They've got a great chance next year, and like I say, they've got plenty to build on, especially after that first half performance at Kingsholm. So they'll be going into next year sort of thinking about some of those missed chances and perhaps defensively what they could have done better on the day, because they had opportunities to make it an extremely close game, and I think next year it will be a tough one to predict between them and the Army women. Like you're never not going to back the Army women because of how incredible they've been over the years. But I think there is so much potential and so many incredible players. And don't forget, probably a star international coming back for the RAF women next year.
Yeah, well, Sarah Bonner was unavailable for
this
injury.
Through injury for this tournament, and I saw her doing her best water girl stuff on the day at Kingsholm.
And punditry. She's been very well in the punditry, hasn't she, as well?
Yeah, so I think having her back, that's an automatic extra lift for next year. And obviously we were talking about that international standard and that professional mindset that those players bring into camp and when they're on the pitch. When you see somebody at those kind of levels and they're playing at that level, you tend to raise your game to the best player on the pitch, and I think that's something that they'll be looking to bring into next year. And the thing I love about the Army women, we talk about Jade Mullen, and she's their constant strive for perfection, and they will want to improve on this year, so they're going to only be better.
Yeah,
which is a scary thought.
That's it's crazy, isn't it? It really is. But that's what's so exciting. And we mentioned the caliber of these teams, and it's just a reminder of how good these players are. Yeah. And we get to be there to see it. Everyone who's watching live with us as well, those who turn up the ground, can watch all of this amazing rugby and just be reminded of that every time. It's almost a shame that we've got 3 games every year in the springtime, and then we have to wait.
I'm so gutted it's come to a close. It comes and goes so quickly, and this is the thing. What the players talk about is just like they are living for this tournament, and then they've got to wait so long to, especially if you're in the RAF and Navy camp, you've got to wait so long to sort of put some of those mistakes right. Yeah, put some of those mistakes right. And we talk about the men's tournament, though. There's plenty for Navy men to take out of that tournament in terms of they got the victory against the RAF. They pushed the Army so close. They were never losing at Twickenham.
No,
were they? No one never losing.
No,
it wasn't until gone 80 minutes that they were down on scoreboard. So in many ways they'll feel like they sort of won that game but didn't. They lost the game that they won. So I think they'll know that they have the capability to beat the Army men, because they did it last year and they came so close this year. And as for the RAF men, I think we're speaking to Ryan Crowley, and at the end of the game they've got plenty of young players that they're looking to bring through.
Squad.
It's a young squad.
Yeah.
It's a young squad. It's an exciting squad, and if you, they're similar to the Army women in terms of the brand of rugby that they want to play. I think it's a case of they're looking for those young players to step up a little bit further next year, and essentially bring in a bit of squad strength, because that's what they're lacking when it comes to competing to the other 2 men's teams. Is when you come off that bench strength, you need your bench players to essentially be as good as your starters. We talk about finishers and starters in rugby, and that's what the RAF are probably lacking compared to the Army and Navy. But they certainly have a team that can beat both the Army and Navy. It's just about putting that right game together on the day, and some of those players making that next step, come into that next level. And I think that's what the likes of JC will be trying to do for next year's tournament.
And you learn that with experience.
Yes.
You see some young players who are extremely exciting, and dual code players like Kieran Prescott, who had scored 10 tries leading into this year's tournament for the RAF in the light blue, and just a wonderful gifted runner, such pace as well, and such brilliant awareness. When he looks up, he's able to put those chipped balls in over the top when he's playing on the wing. So you give those players another couple of seasons, for example, or maybe even next season, and another season of playing for clubs and everything like that. Wow, that's mouth-watering.
It is mouth-watering. We've got to wait another year. Why?
What are you going to do?
Why?
You're ringing me every night, like 3 in the morning, saying, it's not happening tomorrow. What's going on?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's got to wait another year. But there's so so much to look forward to for next year's tournament, and so many sort of intriguing things in terms of stories of what's going to go on. But I think it's in terms of like how we're sort of sign off this pod is that the Army captain Pete Austin, saying that the trophy is back where it belongs. The tournament is back where it belongs in Army hands. So they are going to literally have to prize it. Someone's going to have to rip it off those Army men.
They are. And I just wanted to touch very briefly on the fact that I noticed you were very quiet after the Twickenham Army Navy men's match, because I, of course, had made the prediction that the Army would win just win. Now, can I even claim this one?
No.
43-42 in the end, of course, with that try in the last play of the game, Imi Korawale. Yeah, that was I'm very, very sad, and I haven't got over that yet, JJ. Maybe this is why I was not very well last week.
Maybe. I did go a little bit quiet at the end of the game, but it did also feel like
your breath back.
It's also, to be fair, yeah. But it also felt like you were very quiet at half time. Like,
just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. I don't think you were predicting that at that point the Army were going to win.
I was focusing on my commentary notes.
Oh.
But just as we look to wrap up, who would you say is your player of the tournament? And it doesn't have to necessarily be, for both men and women, it doesn't necessarily have to be from the victorious Army sides.
I'm going to go for the Army women, because I just think they were so ruthless. I thought Courtney Persglove looked fantastic in the Army Navy game, and then we didn't actually see her in the RAF game. She came off the bench, didn't she?
Carrying a niggle, I think.
Carrying a niggle, and so we didn't actually get to see much of her in that final game. But I'm going to go for Captain Fantastic Jade Mullen. She's impressed me so much off the pitch as well as on it, and I think that is what all the stuff and how she presents herself, how she talks, how she holds herself is exactly how those women play when they go on the pitch, and it is just pure professional, pure attitude. They're switched on, and I think maybe that's what perhaps the other teams need to look at in terms of I think that for me is on and off the pitch, and she brings it on the pitch as well as off it. But I thought she was fantastic. I mean, I do want to give a shout out to Karis Williams-Morris, because her tries in that opening fixture, her epic try against the Army, she was fantastic to watch. But I am going to go for Jade Mullen in the women. It's a very difficult one for the men. I really
tough, isn't it? Yeah. It's not often to see JJ speechless.
I know. Do you know what?
It's actually not wonderful.
Do you know what? I'm gonna throw it back to you before I just need to think about it, because like I say, it's not just when you think of the Navy men almost winning that game at Twickenham, it's not just automatic that it is an Army player. So who do you think?
I think at the women's side, there are several mentions you could make. As you have, Jade Mullen, I thought was instrumental. I think Lauren Brooks in the back row, Sally Bellhouse once again, and we saw how good Sally was on Saturday from number 8. But I think Lou Dodd for me, for the Army, ever-present figure, a brilliant boot, often not just used for exit strategies, but to gain that territory quite often for the Army, and great ball carrier at 12, and able to penetrate that defence almost at will, I think, at times, and get that ball moving forward, try and get quite an advantage every time Lou Dodd touches the ball. So I'd say Lou Dodd for the women. I also must make a mention must mention Rose Dixon, the Navy captain. Third appearance at Twickenham when we were at the Home of English Rugby a couple of weekends ago, and really trying to pick up that Navy side to close the gap, as she herself said in the lead up to the tournament. So wonderful performance. Another inside centre as well. So that's on the women's side. I think on the men's side, I'm going to go with Frank Kelly. I think we saw the likes of Solo Radianarova and Imi Korowale performing brilliantly and just the sort of silky footwork to score sensational tries and just weaving their way through the defence. But the difference that he made, Frank Kelly, coming on against the Navy at Twickenham in the second half, made all the difference for me. I think that enabled them to get ball moving forward. And once again, pivotal performance at Kingsholm. And in defence too. Very difficult down that sort of in that midfield to get past that pairing of him and Radianarova as well. So I'd go Frank Kelly for the men and Lou Dodd in the women's game.
Yeah, you made a good point there. And we talked about that depth and that bench and how they made the difference at Twickenham. I think I just want to. I'm going to go for the glory boy. I think I'm going to go Korowale.
Yes.
For them.
Cool.
Yeah. I just think you look at that try at the end of the game. It was such a big moment. And we talked about the Army men and their support running. It's so easy to say, like, follow a man that's making a break, but to actually do it and to actually be there in the correct position and to hold your run, so you're running make sure you're running behind them. There's
especially at the end of a game, especially after 60, 70, 80 minutes of the game.
Such a big moment, and then he came into the RAF game and then brought similar performance and managed to get on the scoreboard again. I'm going to go Korowale. I think that was I think Newcastle Falcons, we're looking forward to having him bring in that next season in the Premiership, because I think he was brilliant.
I feel a bit ashamed, actually, JJ, as a former back three player myself, mentioning only centres and giving mentions to Lou Dodd, to Frank Kelly, to Rose Dixon as well. Talking about Radianarova's brilliance as well at 13. But what about one word to sum up the tournament? This is a tricky one, I guess. But if there's one word, or even a couple of words you can think of to sum up the last few weeks.
I mean, there are a few words that are as in single words. Incredible.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Tries.
Tries. I think you're right. Yeah, I think tries. Treat. Just a treat for the eyes, wasn't it?
Absolute feast of rugby.
Total feast.
An absolute feast of rugby. I think all those players, the coaching staff, and everybody involved in all of those teams should be tremendously proud of themselves for the tournament and the spectacle that they put on. It truly was phenomenal. I think the standard of the games are getting bigger and better. I think the things that we're trying to bring to the tournament behind the scenes, we're hopefully bringing more insight into the players and their mindsets, and it's only getting bigger and better, and we're expecting a few announcements hopefully ahead of next season's tournament. We had the bigger launch day at Twickenham Stadium this year. The tournament's only getting bigger and strong. I know if I can bring up our record viewing figures in terms of the viewing figures are a lot higher this year than last year. More people, thank you very much, are watching.
Yes, thank you for that.
Yes. So it's only exciting. Roll on 2025. Come on. I
know. It's sort of it feels like you asked me what last year was, and I'd say 2003. I don't know how we're in 2024, but here we are, and 2025 next year. Wow. But indeed, if anyone wishes to see more of the content, to rewatch the games in full, of course, you can head to Forces News YouTube. You can go to the website for the full match reports as well on forces.net and see some of the highlight clips as well. And where else? Forces Socials. It's all over Forces News Socials and BFBS Sport, isn't it?
Forces News Socials. You can watch some of the best tries of the tournament, and fantastic support in terms of the amount of people that have been clicking and viewing, and we really appreciate and all of you who've been watching these podcasts. Like, there will be more of them. We will go bigger, stronger, harder, faster.
Team talk.
Next year. So I am so excited and so incredibly proud of everybody involved in the Inter Service Championship.
Absolutely. Here. Well said. Congratulations to all. Thank you all for watching on Forces News YouTube, all of our vodcasts on forces.net, checking out the latest content that we have on all of our social media channels as well. We're very sad that we've got no more rugby at the moment, inter-service wise, but of course we look ahead to 2025 and we're going to go and take JJ's mind off it, get him an ice cream, and we'll catch you all very soon.